Hi, I'm Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and today I'm going to be talking about why Al Capone's tax evasion conviction is complete As a tax attorney and one-time criminal defense attorney, there's few things that outrage me more than Al Capone's tax evasion conviction. And I think a lot of popular misconceptions are out there of exactly what happened. And I think the entire thing happened to actually prop up the income tax rather than to be the sword to knock it down. There's really only one thing that caused Al Capone, the super gangster, to exist, and that is progressive ideology. These are the people who wanted the 16th Amendment passed. That is the law. That is the amendment authorizing a personal income tax, and also wanted the 18th Amendment passed to prohibit alcohol. And both of these things together created a nightmare scenario that the only person that I could see who's known to pay the price is Al Capone, where the people who were actually responsible got off scot-free. By which I mean, of course, Al Capone is responsible for his own actions. We are all responsible for our own actions. But those who empower criminals like Al Capone should too be held responsible. So I'm going to talk about some of the myths out there in popular culture. A lot of people say, well, you know, that the income tax, will say what you want about it, but it is a good thing because it did finally put Al Capone behind bars. Well, that's not really an accurate statement, and maybe it's a small thing to you, but Al Capone actually did do time before. He was booked on a weapons charge and served 9 months in prison well before his tax evasion trial was started. And so it seems like he wasn't as untouchable as people made him to be. It just, all you had to do was actually go arrest him. This second part is actually pretty infuriating. And the reason why isn't because it happened then, because it still happens today. It happens today that, you know, Al Capone actually attempted to pay his taxes, but the Treasury wouldn't allow him to do so. He hired an attorney to what I would consider to be a modern day equivalent of do a voluntary disclosure to say, hey, look, it looks like I haven't filed taxes in a few years. This is what I think my gross income has been for the past year. It's actually net income. Would you please send me a bill? Please send me a tax bill, and Al Capone will pay it. So that was for years. That letter was there, but the Treasury said, oh, no. We have Al Capone. We could finally take him down. Instead of just sending him a bill and have him pay the bill, they didn't want him to, so they roped him along. And this was a new thing, so I don't really blame his attorney for not realizing the IRS was looking for a way to punish Al Capone that the criminal justice system wasn't able to do. So they just didn't do anything. They ignored that letter for the large part where he was saying, here's my income. And they really limited the admissibility of this letter in trial, where Al Capone tried to say, no, I've been trying to pay. I haven't been hiding anything. This is what I've made. Send me a bill. That wasn't allowed into evidence. The thing about Al Capone was that his income that he claimed was enough to support his lifestyle. A lot of people say, oh, well, Al Capone, you know, he made that fatal mistake. He said he didn't make anything and he was living this lavish lifestyle. Yes, he was living a lavish lifestyle, but if you look at the amount of money he said he was making, it was in the millions for all the years involved. Well, yeah, you could afford a nice car when you're making millions of dollars. That's not a problem. So there's something that is just so wrong about this. Now, this is what ties in today. So many people, they realize they have a problem with their taxes. And if they're hit with a target letter by the Department of Justice, if something is happening where they know they're being investigated, this is so common, it drives me nuts. Their attorney will say, they'll get a criminal attorney, and typically, because the good ones know to do this a little differently, they'll say, all right, well, let's just hold tight. Let's not file anything. Let's just hold tight. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what, you know, we'll try to negotiate something with the IRS. Oh no, don't you see what they're doing? They're taking your time of not taking action while this case is investigating, and now they're going to use that against you. Well, you didn't know you didn't pay your taxes. Now, this is the thing. A jury, actually, they don't think a lot of times that you're actually going to go to prison if you don't pay your tax bill. What they really think is, hey man, I have to pay my taxes. You should pay your taxes too, but you haven't filed anything, you haven't paid anything. So one of the surest ways to maximize your chances of an acquittal is to make sure, okay, an investigation starts, make sure you have everything filed correctly, and pay whatever you can. And then if you could pay it off in full, great. If you could start, and the IRS probably won't take a payment agreement, you start making voluntary payments. And one thing too, right now, this year, whatever it is, you start making estimated payments for the year that you're in. Be in 100% compliance. So this is what happens when you do that, as opposed to waiting for something to happen. Let me tell you what happens when an indictment's gone. You're probably going to plead guilty. 92% of people plead guilty. And most of the time, there's very few defense attorneys out there who actually can get acquittals at a decent rate. I happen to be friends with a few of them. And the way they work cases is pretty interesting. And it's so interesting that so many criminal attorneys drop the ball on this. You have to split the defense. That's what you need to do. The criminal side of the IRS and the civil side, they don't really know what each side is doing. You work with the civil side because you have that obligation. That's regardless of whether you're an investigation. You still have an obligation to file everything and to pay whatever you can. So make sure you do that, because first thing that happens, you might get an acquittal if you go to jury trial, or even better, the IRS says, you know what? Why go after you? They can go after somebody else who isn't doing it correctly. So that's just absolutely infuriating. I understand it happened to Al Capone, but why is it happening to people today? If your client, if you are an investigation, you have no excuse not to be in compliance. Get in compliance. It can only help you out. Like all of our videos and content, nothing we provide in public is a substitute for legal advice. Always consult with your attorney. Exceptions are always the rule, except to this rule, which is absolutely infallible, probably. One of the things that bothers me tremendously about the Al Capone tax evasion conviction is that he became a scapegoat for progressive malfeasance. And first, I better explain to you what progressives are, at least my definition of a progressive. That was a very hot political party, turn of the century, last century. Progressives were an odd bunch. They believe in phrenology, a lot of them did, and that's where the size of your skull determines your intelligence. And actually, my hat size isn't all that large, so I don't know what they would think of me. They also believed in eugenics, that in order to wipe the world of all the morons and all the bad people in the world, we just have to stop them from breeding. Forced sterilization was a big thing they were fanned on. Abortions, big thing they were fans of. Always, interestingly, they were never the problem, though. It was always, as long as you identify as a progressive, you know things, and you're smarter than other people. And just because the results of what happens are a complete disaster doesn't mean you were wrong. Actually, the world was wrong. Progressives also, they lined up with temperance unions. They believed in sobriety for others generally, for themselves for some degree. They wanted world sobriety, but that was really, if you looked into it, who they really wanted to be sober, you're going to see a lot of racism. Yeah, they were pretty racist people. Woodrow Wilson was one of the biggest progressive of all time, somebody who's absolutely disgusting in every sort of way, true megalomaniac. Boy, was he behind every bad idea there is. He was a big racist, big fan of A Birth of a Nation, a very racist film, because it's true, according to Woodrow Wilson. And that's where progressives see themselves. They see themselves as knowing what is best for everybody else. They're self-appointed, right? That's because you're just better than everybody else, and you have it all figured out. Yeah, sure, there's been a lot of history over the world, but, that's before you were born, and they were just stupid back then. Now we could do things right. And so progressives did all sorts of things, and all this control of the federal government to make sure that people were doing what they wanted them to do. Progressives, this is just really one of the most terrifying, underreported stories of prohibition. Progressives pressured the federal government to add these horrific poisons to industrial alcohol. Now, what was happening before was industrial alcohol was bought and it was redistilled to remove all the poisons, and you could basically drink it. So it was a cheaper way to get alcohol, because you didn't have to do that first, you didn't have to take that large mash and distill it down. You actually had the much smaller distilled alcohol, so it was cheaper and you can get it out there. Well, progressives had an idea. You want to hear the idea? It goes something like this. Hey, let's add really, really bad poisons that don't redistill out. That's what we'll do. So they added these terrible poisons, and just like they knew, they did not distill out. So people were drinking their redistilled alcohol thinking it was fine. After 3 drinks, you'd probably go blind. That's nice, huh? And after that, you might be dead. In fact, it's estimated 10,000 people died through this intentional poisoning. Just horrific. No one really ever paid the price for that one, except one guy, Al Capone, right? We had to get him because he was the problem. This is how bad it is. Okay, this is how bad these progressives are. You had one, his name was Wayne Wheeler of the Anti-Saloon League, and basically, we hate the Irish is another code word for the Anti-Saloon League. He was ecstatic about this. He was ecstatic that people were dying from poisoned alcohol. He said this: if America could be made sober and temperate in 50 years, a good job will have been done. What's a little poison between friends? Wow. They'd rather have you dead than with a buzz. Think about how crazy this all is. People were killed, and we don't know how many people were permanently damaged. And no one was ever held responsible. And I think the quote by C.S. Lewis is most appropriate here. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under an omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own goodwill torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. And really, for me, I think I would rather be ruled by Al Capone than by a progressive. At least Al Capone probably knows he's kind of a dirtbag, right? And there's probably a limit to how far he will go. Progressives, on the other hand, they think their bad things are good. They think murdering 10,000 people is fine. What's a little poison between friends? By the way, I'm not a fan of Al Capone. I'm not saying he didn't do horrible things or that he shouldn't have been sent to prison, but I would prefer him to be convicted on the things that he did do, not on the things he didn't do. And you need to understand the interplay between the 16th Amendment and the 18th Amendment. The 16th Amendment is the amendment that authorized a personal tax on income, and the 18th Amendment is what led to the Volstead prohibition. Now, the 16th Amendment was passed first. You probably knew that because it was a lower number. It was passed in 1913. And the reason why it was passed is because they were looking forward, knowing that there was this huge national outcry by a select group of people who knew better than you, that we needed prohibition, but the federal government got its excise taxes from the sale of alcohol. So if they're going to make something alcohol, if they're going to make alcohol legal, they're going to need a new source of revenue. And that's where the progressive says, well, you're not going to believe this, but there's a way not only to get rid of alcohol, but there's a way for us just to make something like a utopia. And nothing could possibly go wrong because we are progressives and we know better than everybody else. The grandfather of the federal income tax, the federal income tax of 1913, was a gentleman named Cordell Hull. And he flat out admitted revenue wasn't really the goal of the income tax. Rather, it was to direct social behavior that progressives thought you should be following. And if you don't, they have the threat of violence or actual violence to make sure that you do. The Al Capone conviction justified this history of progressive malfeasance. So see, our income tax got Al Capone, but yet the income tax is the alpha and omega of Al Capone. If the income tax wasn't passed, there could be no prohibition. If there was no prohibition, I don't know, Al Capone would have been a low-rent pimp. Luckily, the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th. However, the 16th Amendment has never been repealed, and unfortunately, it is used as the backdoor to unlimited government power. You just have to look at the Obamacare, Sebelius versus King, and their Justice Roberts like, well, you know, it's tax. It's a tax, so you could do anything you want, which is just unbounded. I'm not as opposed to a tax on personal income. Well, I kind of am, but anyway, let's just say that I'm not. But I would say this, at a minimum, its primary focus, its only allowed purpose should be to raise revenue, not direct every little minutia of your life with violence or the threat of violence, and that is what's done today. We can have a federal government with limited power, or we can have a personal income tax as currently enforced. You got to pick one, though. The Revenue Act of 1862 and 1863 imposed income taxes, and they were used to fund the Civil War. Now, these were done prior to the 16th Amendment, yet it was held to be constitutional. The reason why is everybody knew a personal income tax was a wartime measure, completely legitimate. We look at today's income tax and we say, yeah, this is a wartime measure. I don't know. Are we in peace or are we in war? If we're in war, who are we fighting? And if our objective was to defend freedom and liberty, guess what, folks? I think we lost that battle a long time ago. This is Anthony Parent of Parent LLP, IRS Medic. Thanks for watching, and spread the news about a little bit how out of control the IRS is, and subscribe to this channel. I don't always speak about topics like this. Sometimes I get into the actual technical aspects, so be sure to subscribe. We'll keep you informed with all the updates and some of the tax reform that is going on in Congress right now.